Good afternoon, everyone, and hello from Singapore. Thank you very much to the cluster office in Almaty for this kind invitation to join this sub-regional online meeting. It is a pleasure to join all of you and to also have heard your presentations, which gave a very interesting overview of what is happening in your country and your region. This afternoon, I thought I would share with you what role the 2005 convention has in terms of the investment in cultural and creative industries, which is increasingly becoming important to several of our economies. I'll try to broadly go through the key messages of the convention, its benefits and obligations, and also give you a wide range of examples from across Asia and Europe as to how other countries have used the convention to support the creative industries in their own contexts. And last but not the least, to look at some of the challenges that countries are facing and also leave with you some key resources that you could use to explore this topic further. We're all aware, and we have been hearing in the last decade or so, that the cultural industries are increasingly contributing to both GDP and jobs across the world. Even as far back as 2015, which is 5 years ago now, more than 30 million people worldwide were working in the cultural and creative industries. And the global turnover was over 2,000 billion US dollars. Countries such as Brazil, China, India, and Indonesia in the developing world were reporting that more than 10% of their GDP was now coming from the cultural and creative sectors. Some of you already alluded to this percentage in your own context. Georgia shared that it's about 2.8% now of the GDP of Georgia coming in from the cultural and creative sectors, with over 5% of the population working there. So this is the context in which we are all working, where cultural and creative industries are increasingly becoming important to our economic development. We use the term cultural and creative industries all the time. But in the context of the 2005 convention, it's always important for us to define and to remember which sectors we are particularly talking about when we talk about the convention. We're talking about music, we're talking about the visual arts, publishing, films, photography, and all manner of live performances, be it dance, be it arts festivals, theater, etc. The other term that we constantly encounter when we talk about the convention is the value chain. When we talk about film or when we talk about music, we are speaking about all the 4 aspects of the value chain. How music or films are created. Sometimes they are done in studios of artists. At other times, they are done through a residency. So all manner of creation, also of production. Then we move to distribution. And last but not the least, we're also very much interested in how audiences enjoy the arts. Are they going out to the cinema to watch a movie in the theater? Something I think we have all forgotten now in the last year because we are all caught up at home. Or increasingly, as we see, we are now enjoying films, even visits to museums online through our screens. So we're looking at all 4 aspects of the value chain: creation, production, distribution, and enjoyment. So what the 2005 convention essentially does is that it provides to countries both inspiration and legitimacy to make cultural policies and help them promote the cultural and creative sector of their own country. The second critical aspect to remember is that we are living in a digital age. And we are now, especially in the last year, consuming more and more of culture digitally. Therefore, it is also about adapting the policies, programs, and legislations that already exist to the digital times. And this happens primarily at the national level. And we're also seeing how there is a lot of policy innovation beginning to happen at the city municipality level and also at the regional level. For instance, we see this very clearly in the European Union or in Southeast Asia, where I am based, through the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the ASEAN community. Another interesting aspect linking to the creative industries is that The policies are not only about policies made by ministries in charge of culture. There is a need for collaborative governance because several different ministries are involved and have to be involved in order to promote the cultural and creative industries in a positive way. This was already alluded to in some of your presentations where you spoke about the Ministry of Economy supporting entrepreneurs or small and medium enterprises, for instance. Without the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Visas, it will be impossible to promote our artists abroad. Without the Ministry of Trade or Economy, it would not be possible to get special subsidies for entrepreneurs to set up small and medium enterprises. So one very interesting aspect of the convention is that it encourages countries to make integrated policies and to have more interministerial collaborations in order to support the cultural and creative industries. So what are some of the key messages of the convention? I think at the heart of the convention is the message that all citizens, particularly cultural professionals, should have the freedom to create, to produce, to disseminate, as well as to enjoy a whole range of cultural goods and services, both from their own cultural context and also to enjoy the best of culture from abroad, including also having the right to make and consume their own culture. So what we see with this convention is that it recognizes what the convention calls the dual nature of cultural goods and services. Going to a cinema theater and buying a ticket and watching a film, you will all agree, is slightly different from going to the shop at the corner of your street and buying a soap or a toothpaste. In both cases, we buy something, we pay for it and we buy something, but there is something cultural. There is something about our identities. There's something about symbolic meaning that is there in a film, which is obviously not there in a soap or a toothpaste. So this is what the convention means when it repeats that there is a dual nature in films or theater or music. On one hand, yes, you can buy a ticket and see a movie. You can pay for your streaming service and listen to music. But on the other hand, there is something in that product that goes beyond being just a commodity or a consumer good that can be traded, because it is made from the individual creativity of a person. Therefore, the convention strongly encourages that in making policies, we have to acknowledge this contemporary and individual creativity of those who are making and sharing these cultural works with us. It also reemphasizes the fact that cultural expressions are manifest not only in cultural heritage, but also in contemporary expressions of creativity when an artist makes a song and uploads it on YouTube, or when a group of people make a film. Therefore, a key phrase that we keep hearing in this convention and which is embedded in the very title is the diversity of cultural expressions. So by this, we mean diverse cultural content. By this, we mean artistic expressions. And it is important to remember that this is a little bit different from the phrase cultural diversity, which essentially refers to people who come from different ethnicities. So this is often also a very common challenge in understanding the convention, and sometimes there is confusion between the two terms. So one way to remember the focus of this convention is also to look at it from the point of view of cultural content and artistic expressions. One of the landmark things that we have to remember about the 2005 convention is that it is the very first of its kind in international law, because it also provides an innovative platform for international cultural cooperation. Two things to keep in mind to summarize the convention. Essentially, the convention says that we have to have diversity of cultural content, be it what we hear on the radio, what we see in the cinema or on our TV screens. And secondly, it reminds us that such cultural expressions is not only about the symbolic meaning, not only about our identity, but very importantly, they can also contribute to the socio-economic development of our countries. There are 6 UNESCO conventions, as you can see on this slide. And the 2005 convention is the most recent or the youngest of these 6 culture conventions of UNESCO. It is a legally binding international agreement once countries ratify it, and it encourages all the state parties to introduce policies and measures that will create and then protect the spaces for a diversity of cultural expressions to emerge in their own countries. So when a country decides to ratify the convention, prior to this, of course, there are several consultations that take place at the country level. And once it is ratified, what happens is that a copy is deposited then with UNESCO, and then the liaison begins with the Secretariat at UNESCO, which is in charge of the convention, towards implementing it. The convention text, which some of you may already have read, is, as all of us know, it is difficult. It can be quite abstract. So the way to understand the convention is also through the operational guidelines. These are a series of much more practical measures, ideas, through which the convention can be implemented at the ground level. Every country identifies a national point of contact, who acts as the main liaison between UNESCO and the country. And every 2 years, all the countries that have ratified the convention meet for a conference of parties. In addition to the conference of parties, there is also another mechanism through which this convention works. This is the Inter-Governmental Committee. This is a smaller group of representatives, and different countries get elected in turn to this Inter-Governmental Committee, which does more of the hands-on work towards the operational guidelines and other issues related to the convention. And one of the key instruments of sharing information is the report that every country has to then submit once in 4 years to UNESCO. This report is also available in the public domain because information sharing is one of the key objectives of the convention. So what are the benefits for a country that has ratified the convention? First and foremost, I think it gives every country the sovereign right to make and implement national policies and schemes that will both protect and promote their own cultures. And I think this becomes particularly important when we see that, for instance, a common debate in parts of Southeast Asia where I live is that the movies from India are so popular that it's almost impossible sometimes to see a movie made in one of the local languages here, like Malay, in the cinemas. And how can movies that are made in Malay and movies that represent Malay culture be available in the cinemas, because they're often not commercially making money. So this is where policies and programs of a government could come in to set aside a quota where every Friday a Malay movie must be shown at the cinema. So in an era of globalization, one of the key benefits of this convention is that it allows countries to make policies that will protect their own culture. Secondly, culture has often been left out of the conversation related to sustainable development, and the convention has helped put culture back in the development discussions. And increasingly, almost I think 86% of the countries that are parties to the convention now include culture as a critical part of national development plans. So this is another benefit of the convention, that culture and development can now work together. Export of cultural goods and services such as films are much easier for countries that have signed the convention. Another big advantage that is being enjoyed by developing countries is the notion of preferential treatment. So in signing treaties and agreements with other countries, developing countries are increasingly able to ask for preferential treatment, visa fee exemption, visa exemptions, etc., to promote their own artists and cultural products. As one of the countries mentioned in their presentation here today, it is possible to also access funding through the International Fund for Cultural Diversity if a country has signed up to the convention. The other international dimension of the convention community is that it helps a country build international visibility for the work that is happening in their own country. This is done through several platforms, including now the UNESCO policy monitoring digital platform, which I will share with you later. Not only can the government share its own policies and programs, it is also possible for the civil society in the countries that have ratified the convention to showcase their own achievements, to attend as observers the conference of parties and also the special civil society forum that takes place every 2 years at the UNESCO headquarters. Of course, with benefits also come obligations. And the core obligation of any country that has ratified the convention is that they will create favorable conditions for the artists in their country to express themselves and for audiences in their country to access both domestic and foreign content. The convention also stresses that countries should take into account and make special policies for the needs of women, minorities, youth, and any other special group. Public awareness of the convention should be raised. Education and training for artists and creative entrepreneurs should be made available. Civil society should be involved at various levels in promoting the convention as well as in policy making. Countries, as we said earlier, should nominate a point of contact, should submit a report every 4 years, and should also be willing to share information and good practices with the other countries that have signed the convention. We'll now turn to see what are some of the ways in which countries that have signed the convention have actually translated these ideas into action. So one of the things that the convention advocates is to use legislation or to use financial incentives to promote the cultural and creative industries. It could be a law on culture, or it could be tax incentives that support for instance, small and medium-sized enterprises to put original cultural content into the market. Let me share an example with you from Indonesia. So Indonesia, in the last few years, has introduced a milestone new national law for culture. And this new national law very much promotes the contemporary creativity among especially the young creators. And this was very much inspired by the convention. It also has other policies and programs that have in recent years been revised and updated in order to promote contemporary creativity. For instance, the government supports a wide range of book fairs and public events that promote the publishing industry. The national film law has recently been updated in order taking into account the new digital medium in which we work. At the city or municipality level, an interesting initiative is a networking initiative, which is the National Creative Cities Network. So now there is a network of hundreds of cities across Indonesia, each specializing in a creative area such as design or gastronomy, which meet regularly and which share best practices. So these are ways in which national or domestic policies can be made in favor of the cultural and creative sector. All of us are aware that the mobility of artists is a critical issue. It is not always easy for artists, especially those coming from developing countries, to travel and show their work internationally. This is because of lack of funds, but also very often because of complex visa procedures and very high application fees. And so the mobility of artists, how to promote it, especially the mobility of those artists who come from the global south or the developing countries, is a key focus of the convention. And the convention provides several articles and tools which can be used to promote the mobility of artists. I'll share with you 2 examples. Germany, for instance, has set up the Moving MENA Fund, MENA here referring to the Middle East and North Africa region. So they have set up a fund with German funds that promotes the mobility of artists from the Arab world. And in the Arab world, the particular challenge is getting the visa to travel into developed countries. So this is a fund set up by Germany through the convention, through their commitment to the convention to promote mobility in the Arab world. New Zealand in recent years has initiated special immigration processes to make the visa application and the visa processes for artists much simpler. So this again is part of their commitment towards international cooperation through the convention. In addition to moving artists, we're also talking about the export of global goods and services, such as, for instance, film. Again, here, 75% of these exports are coming from developed countries, and only about 25 to 26% are coming from developing countries. So it is another aspect of the convention to promote more cultural goods and services from the developing countries to reach across the globe. Let's see two examples from Norway and Switzerland, how they are supporting this. Switzerland has set up the South Culture Funds, which is essentially funds for countries from the global south or developing countries, which artists and arts organizations can apply to do a variety of cultural activities. They can use it for preparing a tour to another country, including in the global north. They can use it for training and networking activities. And the fund itself is set up by Switzerland, but it is available to all developing countries. And Switzerland has once again done this as part of its commitment to the convention. The digital environment is another area that the convention is very aware of, because adapting whatever legislations, policies, and programs that exist to our contemporary environment is absolutely critical. 15 years ago, I think we were all buying CDs. 25 years ago, we were buying cassettes, but now we stream our music online. This changes in many ways the problems that artists face. Do artists get fair wages for when they produce or share their work online? This is a critical question. There is also the big question of the monopoly of a few big players. A lot of data on who consumes what is now in private hands, and data is often very critical for policy making. So these are the new issues that have emerged because we are both creating and consuming a lot of cultural content online. So one of the things that the convention very strongly advocates countries to do is to constantly adapt their policies for the digital age, so that the cultural content from their own countries is visible and is seen across the world. A good example comes from Switzerland, which has set up a crowdfunding portal. And through this portal, any artist or arts organization is able to raise its visibility and look for additional funding to support itself. As I said earlier, culture is increasingly becoming prominent in the sustainable development plans of many countries, particularly in developing countries. And for instance, to take the example of Vietnam, one of the areas that Vietnam has focused on in the last decade is to improve its rural digital infrastructure, meaning that the access to the internet in rural areas would improve, both in terms of quality as well as widening the access. And this has been a part of their national creative economy strategy, because without improving rural connectivity, it would be impossible to extend cultural content, whether it's through radio or film or TV, to the rural areas. So in this way, countries have also been looking at the convention to improve infrastructure, particularly in a digital age. Turning towards the international, we're all aware that all our countries make treaties and agreements with other countries and with other regional bodies in order to promote cultural exchange. If both sides or both countries that are signing a treaty are part of the convention community, then it is possible, and this is one of the big benefits available to countries, it is possible that countries can request a special status to be given to the cultural goods and services from their country in the form of preferential treatment. A very good example comes from the European Union, which has included preferential treatment in its trade agreements with most of the countries that it has signed trade agreements with. So this means that when we are talking about culture as part of a trade agreement, then certain cultural exceptional privileges will be given and certain preferential treatment will be given in order to help artists from developing countries access the markets in developed countries much more easily. These could be in the form of long-term visas. These could be in the form of easier bureaucratic procedures to get a visa. This could also mean visa fee waiver. It could also mean that certain countries could say that every year I will send 1,000 artists to the European Union for a 6-month tour. So a variety of things could be negotiated if one is a party to the convention, and developing countries could definitely use this preferential treatment to their advantage. On the other hand, there is also, in addition to cultural exchange treaties that we sign, we're also aware that many developing countries receive official development assistance. Interestingly, and rather sadly, only 0.22% of the overall official development assistance usually goes to culture. So one of the aspects to keep in mind is also that countries that are party to the convention could also access official development assistance to be spent on culture in addition to other areas such as health or infrastructure or education. This also helps to increase the funds and resources that are available to a country to develop its cultural sector. An excellent example is the Korean Funds in Trust at UNESCO, and our meeting here today and the K-FIT project itself is being organized through these funds. So several countries are now increasingly committing overseas development aid to be used for developing the cultural and creative sectors in other parts of the world. Civil society is a very integral part of the convention. The convention very strongly encourages all the state parties to partner with civil society for policy making, and it also provides a space for civil society during the conference of parties that takes place at the UNESCO headquarters to share their ideas, recommendations, and their achievements. Two interesting examples in this regard of sort of public-private partnerships that I wanted to share with you are from Cambodia and Croatia. So Cambodia is a signatory to the convention, and a few years ago, an arts forum was organized as part of the initial efforts to promote the convention. Now, this arts forum has now become an annual meeting. It is organized by the Ministry of Culture of Cambodia, as well as by civil society jointly, as a space every year for government officials as well as the artists to meet and discuss challenges. Another example comes from Croatia in Europe, where a foundation was set up a few years ago, the Cultura Nova Foundation. It receives money from the government of Croatia, from the Ministry of Culture, but it acts as a sort of an independent, autonomous foundation, which then uses this public money to give grants to artists. So again, this is an excellent example of a partnership between the public sector and civil society to support the cultural and creative sectors. However, it is not always easy, as some of you have already alluded to in your own presentations, that it is not always easy to promote the convention or to work with the convention to promote the cultural and creative industries. And in the reports that the various countries submit to UNESCO every 4 years, we see some very common challenges across the board. One is the lack of financial and especially human resources to promote the convention. The other is insufficient public-private sector partnerships, because these are not often common in many countries and contexts. The convention itself sometimes is not easily understood. There is, as I said before, sometimes a confusion between diversity of cultural expressions and cultural diversity. So sometimes these multiple understandings of the convention make it also difficult to create awareness both among the public as well as among the officials. The link between culture and economic development and livelihoods and GDP is also sometimes not very well understood, because the convention very strongly advocates that other ministries such as foreign affairs or trade or economy or women's affairs be involved in promoting the cultural sector, interministerial cooperation is critical. And this has often been a challenge in policymaking in many countries and contexts. Lack of cultural data and statistics is a common problem in several parts of the world. Here in Asia, where I am based, it is in South and Southeast Asia. These are huge, there are huge gaps in data, and this then impedes policy development. But countries have also reported some of the ideas or solutions through which they have tackled these challenges. Very often financial and human resources gaps are met only through strategic partnerships between governments, CSOs, and also increasingly the business sector. Raising awareness of the convention is still, I think, after 15 years of the convention, is still very high on the agenda. Training for government officials is again high on the agenda, and the need for more observatories, cultural observatories that collect data and analyze data and best practices, and a system of cultural indicators so that there is a very clear sense of the data that we are collecting. These have been some of the ways in which countries have responded to the challenges that they have faced. I wanted to just share with you a few resources that you could then use to further study the convention. One is, of course, the text of the convention. Perhaps some of you have already read this through. An easier way to understand or remember or access the convention is through this monitoring framework, which clearly lays out the core goals of the convention and the various areas that the convention focuses on. I would say this is a much easier and practical way on a daily basis to use to work on the convention. This is the policy monitoring platform that I referred to earlier. This is an excellent tool because the search function works very well. You can look for examples from any region, from any country, from any artistic discipline that you're interested in, and you will get a range of interesting policies and examples of how other countries are using the convention. For those who are looking at more in-depth information, all the periodic reports that the countries submit every 4 years are available online, and it's possible to go and read them in detail. And these could also be an interesting resource, especially when you are interested in countries that are very similar to your own in context. Then these could be very interesting tools to read and understand not only the achievements, but also the challenges faced by various countries in supporting the creative industries. We cannot discuss culture today without discussing the impact of the pandemic on culture, and an excellent resource is this impact and response tracker that UNESCO has put out and is constantly updating on how countries are adapting and what kind of new schemes countries are now preparing under the convention to support the cultural sector. This report, Culture and Crisis, has already been alluded to by Ms. Sekhar and several others, that this is something definitely worth having a read, because I think in the short to medium term future, the cultural sectors in all our countries will have to adjust or live with the reality of the pandemic and the new normal. In that context, this report, Culture and Crisis, offers some excellent recommendations to take on board. Looking outside the UNESCO resources, I would like to recommend two websites where you could find information from across the world on what is happening in the cultural and creative sectors. One is run by the Asia-Europe Foundation, where I work. This is called Culture 360, so culture360.asef.org. Here we try to collate all the news, events, grants, opportunities, as well as analysis from across 50 countries in Asia and Europe on what is happening in the cultural sector. So this is useful not only for those working in the cultural sector, that is civil society, but it is also very useful for officials who are working on the other side. The other resource is the ACON's newsletter, which is put out by IFACA. IFACA is an international network of arts councils and culture agencies. So it is essentially a network of all public agencies that work on culture, and they provide a lot of information, particularly on the policy side, and this is again available on IFACA's website or something to subscribe to. These provide additional updated and latest information of what is happening in different parts of the world with regard to culture. So on that note, I will end my presentation. And